Julius Caesar, the man who changed the world. Chapter 1. The Hook, a Knife in the Senate. Picture this. It is a cool March morning in Rome, one of the greatest cities the world has ever seen. The year is 44 BC. That means about 2068 years ago. The streets are already buzzing. Merchants are selling bread and olives. Children are chasing dogs through the narrow alleyways. Senators in bright white robes are walking briskly toward a grand building, their sandals clicking on the stone roads. But today is not a normal day. Today, the most powerful man in the entire world is about to walk into a trap. His name is Julius Caesar. He is the ruler of Rome, an empire that stretches from the chilly shores of Britain all the way to the hot, golden sands of Egypt. Millions of people live under his rule. Mighty armies obey his every command. Kings and queens have bowed at his feet. Poets write songs about him. Soldiers worship him like a god. And yet, in just a few hours, everything will end. 23 men are hiding daggers beneath their robes. Some of them are Caesar's closest friends. Some have eaten at his dinner table. Some have fought beside him in wars. But today, they have made a decision. They believe Julius Caesar has become too powerful. They believe Rome needs to be saved from him. So they are going to kill him. But before we get to that dark and dramatic moment, before we follow Caesar into that room where the knives are waiting, we have to go back, way back, all the way to a summer day in ancient Rome, over 100 years before any of this happened, when a baby boy was born into a proud but struggling family. We have to go back to the beginning, because to understand why Julius Caesar became the most famous man in history, you have to understand where he started. And where he started will absolutely surprise you. Chapter 2. Born into Rome, a city like no other. The year is 100 BC. Rome is not yet an empire. It is a republic, which is a Latin word meaning thing of the people. In a republic, no single person is supposed to be the supreme ruler. Instead, elected leaders called senators debate and vote on decisions together. Two men called consuls, sort of like co-presidents, are elected every year to lead the government. It is meant to be a system of balance, where no one person gets too much power. But power, as Caesar would soon discover, is the most addictive thing in the world. Rome in 100 BC is already one of the most impressive places on Earth. Imagine a city of about 1 million people that is bigger than most cities today would have been back then. There are towering temples with marble columns. There are public baths where citizens scrub off the dust of the day and gossip about politics. There are massive arenas where gladiators, trained fighters, battle each other for the entertainment of roaring crowds. The streets are paved with smooth, flat stones. Some buildings have running water through pipes, something most of the ancient world could barely imagine. The Romans speak Latin. They wear togas, long, flowing garments draped over one shoulder. They eat lying down on cushioned couches at dinner parties, using their fingers to pick up food from shared plates. They worship a whole family of gods: Jupiter, the king of the gods; Mars, the god of war; Venus, the goddess of love; Mercury, the swift messenger; Neptune, the ruler of the seas. Religion is everywhere, in temples, in homes, in the actions of the army before battle. Rome rules over much of the known world. Roman soldiers, called legionaries, are the best trained fighting force of the ancient age. They march for hours without complaint. They build their own forts when they camp for the night. They carry javelins, short swords called gladii, that is where the word gladiator comes from, and large shields that they can lock together like a moving wall. Enemies across the Mediterranean tremble when they hear the sound of Roman boots on the march. Into this great, complicated, magnificent city, Gaius Julius Caesar is born. The exact date, historians believe, is July 13th, 100 BC. The name July itself, as you'll discover, is closely connected to Caesar, but we'll get to that later. His full name at birth is Gaius Julius Caesar. In Roman tradition, that middle name Julius was the name of his family clan. His family calls themselves the Julii, and they claim to be descended. That means they believe they are related to, many generations back, from Aeneas, a legendary hero of Troy. And Aeneas, according to Roman myth, was the son of the goddess Venus herself. So from the very beginning, little Gaius grows up being told, "Your family is special. Your bloodline connects to the gods." Whether or not that story is true, it planted something important in young Caesar's mind, a feeling that he was meant for greatness. Chapter 3. The Young Caesar. Family, School, and Survival. The neighborhood where Caesar grows up is called the Subura, and it is not the fancy part of Rome. Not even close. The Subura is noisy, crowded, and a little bit dangerous. The streets are so narrow that two carts can barely pass each other. The apartment buildings, called insulae, which means islands, are stacked 5 or 6 stories high, creaking and crammed with families. It smells of cooking fires, animals, and the daily chaos of city life. It is definitely not the gleaming marble palace you might imagine for the family of someone who claims divine heritage. The truth is, while the Julii family is noble, meaning they belong to Rome's upper class, called patricians, they are not particularly wealthy. Caesar's father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, is a mid-level government official. His mother, Aurelia Cotta, is a sharp-minded, educated woman from a slightly wealthier family. Most historians who study Caesar say that his mother was one of the most important influences of his life. Aurelia was brilliant. She ran the household with calm authority. She made sure her children, Julius, and his 2 sisters, both named Julia, which was the custom of the time, received proper educations. She taught Julius to read, to speak properly, and to think carefully. In a world where most women had little official power, Aurelia was quietly enormously powerful within her home. Young Julius was not the tough, battle-hardened warrior you might expect. As a child, he was actually described as being slender and somewhat delicate. He suffered from headaches throughout his life, and as an adult, from epilepsy, a condition that causes seizures, sudden episodes where the body loses control briefly. Some historians believe these episodes, which Romans sometimes called the falling sickness, actually helped shape Caesar's personality, making him more determined to prove himself through mental and political brilliance, rather than pure physical strength. School for a boy like Caesar was intense. He would have studied grammar, rhetoric, the art of speaking persuasively, and philosophy. He would have read the great poets and historians of Greece and Rome. He would have learned Greek, which was like the international language of the educated ancient world, the way English works today. He would have practiced public speaking, which in Rome was considered one of the most important skills a man could develop. If you couldn't speak well in the Forum, Rome's great public square, you had almost no chance at succeeding in politics. Caesar, it turned out, was extraordinarily gifted with words. But his education was interrupted, dramatically and dangerously, when he was just a teenager. Chapter 4. Danger at 16. The Tyrant Sulla. When Caesar is about 12 years old, his uncle by marriage, a military hero named Gaius Marius, becomes one of Rome's most powerful men. Marius has won incredible military victories, defeating enemies across Africa and stopping a massive invasion from Germanic tribes in the north. He is beloved by the common people of Rome, the ones called plebeians, and he becomes consul 7 times, which is nearly unheard of. Caesar's family is firmly on the side of Marius and the common people, a political faction called the Populares. But Rome has enemies within as well as without. A rival general named Lucius Cornelius Sulla is on the opposite side, the Optimates, or the faction of the wealthy aristocrats who want to protect the traditional power of the Senate. In 88 BC, when Caesar is about 12, something shocking happens that will shape Roman history for a generation. Sulla marches his army on Rome itself. This was absolutely forbidden. Roman law said armies could not cross a sacred boundary line called the Pomerium into the city. But Sulla does it anyway, seizing control of Rome by force. Marius escapes, returns, takes control briefly, then dies. And then Sulla marches on Rome again, in 83 BC, establishes himself as dictator, a word that meant an emergency ruler with total power, though it has taken on an even darker meaning over the centuries, and begins listing the names of his enemies. This list was called a proscription, and if your name appeared on it, it meant anyone in Rome was legally allowed to kill you and collect a reward. Hundreds of people are murdered, their homes and lands are seized, and Julius Caesar, now a teenager, is on Sulla's list. Why? because Caesar has recently been named a priest of Jupiter, the Flamen Dialis, one of Rome's most sacred and ancient religious positions, by the Marian faction. This connects him politically to the enemies of Sulla. Worse, Caesar has just married a woman named Cornelia, daughter of one of Sulla's greatest political enemies. Sulla orders Caesar to divorce her. Caesar refuses. Think about what that means. Caesar is maybe 17 or 18 years old. Sulla is the most powerful and most ruthless man in Rome. Refusing his order is quite literally choosing to risk death. Almost everyone in Rome bows to Sulla's demands. Caesar refuses. He loses his priesthood. He loses his inheritance. And then he goes into hiding, moving from place to place in the hills outside Rome, staying with peasant families, bribing Sulla's soldiers when they get too close. Eventually, Caesar's family connections, particularly through his mother and various influential relatives, help negotiate a pardon. Sulla agrees to let Caesar live, but reportedly says something unforgettable about the young man. In this Caesar, there are many Mariuses. Even then, even at 17, Sulla could see it. This boy had the spirit of a revolutionary. Caesar, freed from immediate danger, but still not truly safe in Rome, does what many ambitious young Romans did. He heads east to join the Roman army as a military officer. His adventures were only just beginning, and the first one would earn him his very first military honor before he was even 20. Chapter 5. The Soldier, Battles, Bravery, and a Pirate King. Caesar's first military posting takes him to the province of Asia, that is modern-day Turkey, where he serves on the staff of the governor. He is young, clever, and eager to prove himself. And in 81 BC, during a siege of a city called Mytilene on the island of Lesbos, Caesar does something that earns him a remarkable award. During the battle, Caesar rescues a fellow soldier who has fallen in a dangerous situation. For this act of bravery, Caesar receives the Corona Civica, the civic crown. This was a crown made of oak leaves, and it was one of the highest military honors a Roman soldier could receive. For the rest of his life, Caesar wore or displayed this crown with immense pride. In Rome, whenever a man with the civic crown entered a room, everyone, even senators, was required to stand up. It was a mark of extraordinary heroism. But this military adventure leads to an interesting detour in Caesar's story. After Sulla dies in 78 BC, Caesar returns to Rome and begins his political career, studying law and speaking in court cases. He becomes known as a brilliant speaker, passionate, eloquent, and impossible to ignore. But seeking to sharpen his speaking skills even further, he decides around 75 BC to travel east again, to the famous island of Rhodes, where the greatest teacher of rhetoric in the ancient world, a man named Apollonius Molon, runs a school. Caesar never makes it to class. On the sea crossing, his ship is captured by pirates. In the ancient Mediterranean, piracy was a serious problem. Organized bands of pirates terrorized the sea lanes, kidnapping wealthy travelers and holding them for ransom. They were tough, ruthless, and they expected their captives to be terrified. Caesar was not terrified. Caesar was offended. The pirates demand a ransom of 20 talents of silver, a massive sum of money. Caesar, from inside his captivity, apparently laughs at this and tells them they are underestimating him. He insists they demand 50 talents instead. Then, while his companions sail off to gather the ransom money, Caesar lives among the pirates for 38 days. He sleeps on their ships, he joins them for meals, he writes poetry and reads it aloud to them, and if they don't applaud enthusiastically enough, he reportedly calls them barbarians. He exercises on deck. He plays games with them. By all accounts, he treats them not as his captors, but as his slightly dim-witted subordinates. And the whole time, with a cheerful grin on his face, he keeps telling them the same thing. When I get out of here, I am going to come back, catch every single one of you, and crucify you. The pirates laughed. They thought he was joking. He was not joking. The ransom is paid. Caesar is freed. He immediately raises a small fleet of ships at the nearest Roman port, sails back to where the pirates are still anchored, and captures all of them. Then he crucifies them, exactly as promised. He does reportedly show some mercy, Historians say he had their throats cut first, so the end would be quicker. But still, he did exactly what he said he would do. This story tells you almost everything you need to know about Julius Caesar. He was charming. He was calm under pressure. He had an almost supernatural self-confidence, and he never, ever made a threat he didn't intend to keep. After this remarkable detour, Caesar finally reaches Rhodes and begins his studies. He becomes even more masterful with language. And then he returns to Rome, ready to begin his real climb to the top. Chapter 6: Climbing the Ladder, Politics in Rome. Roman politics was a complicated, expensive, and often dangerous game. To move up in the government, a Roman man had to follow a path called the cursus honorum, which is Latin for the course of honors. It worked like a ladder, and the rungs went like this. You started as a quaestor, a kind of financial officer who managed public money. Then you might become an aedile, in charge of public buildings and putting on festivals and games. After that came praetor, a senior judge and administrator. And at the very top sat the consul, the highest elected position in the Roman Republic, essentially Rome's leader, serving for 1 year. 2 consuls were elected at a time so they could check each other's power. Caesar was smart enough to know that climbing this ladder required not just talent, but popularity. And popularity in Rome was partly bought. Putting on spectacular public games was one of the best ways to win the hearts of the Roman people, who loved entertainment. When Caesar was aedile in 65 BC, he spent enormous amounts of money, some of it borrowed, putting on gladiator shows, theatrical performances, and public feasts that dazzled the city. Romans who watched the shows loved him for it. During this same period, Caesar made an alliance that would shape Roman history. He became close with 2 of the most powerful men in Rome, Gnaeus Pompey, the brilliant general known as Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Crassus was so wealthy that historians estimate his fortune would equal hundreds of billions of dollars in today's money. He owned silver mines, real estate, and entire armies of slaves. These 3 men formed what historians call the First Triumvirate, from the Latin words for 3 men. It was not an official government body. It was a private agreement, a secret alliance. Together, Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar agreed to support each other, share power, and work together to get what each of them wanted. Pompey wanted official approval of his military conquests in the East. Crassus wanted certain financial contracts for his business interests. Caesar wanted a consulship, and after that the most important thing of all, a military command that would let him build his own army, win his own glory, and come back to Rome as a conquering hero. Caesar was elected consul in 59 BC at age 41. He served his year, pushed through the laws his partners needed, despite fierce opposition from the Senate's conservative faction, particularly a brilliant and stubborn senator named Marcus Porcius Cato, who would become Caesar's most persistent political enemy. And then Caesar got what he really wanted. He was appointed governor of Gaul. Gaul was the region roughly corresponding to modern France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland and Germany. It was wild, largely unconquered territory beyond Rome's established borders. It was the place where a general could build an enormous army, fight great battles, and win the kind of military glory that would make him untouchable back in Rome. Caesar had been planning for this moment his entire life. Now, the real adventure begins. Chapter 7: The Gallic Wars, Conqueror of a Continent. In 58 BC, Julius Caesar arrives in Gaul with 4 legions of Roman soldiers, roughly 20,000 men. Gaul is home to dozens of Celtic tribes, fierce, proud warrior peoples with their own languages, customs, and traditions. They are not unified. They fight each other as much as they fight outsiders, and they are not expecting what is about to happen to them. Over the next 8 years, Julius Caesar will fight over 50 battles in Gaul. He will conquer a territory roughly the size of Western Europe. He will command hundreds of thousands of soldiers. He will earn a reputation as one of the greatest military commanders in the history of the world. He will also write it all down himself. Caesar's account of the Gallic Wars, called Commentarii de Bello Gallico, or Notes on the Gallic War, is one of the most famous pieces of writing from the ancient world. He wrote it in a direct, clear style, describing battles, landscapes, and the customs of the people he encountered. He wrote about himself in the third person, saying Caesar did this, rather than I did this, which gave the text a seemingly objective, journalistic feel. Roman schoolchildren read it for centuries to learn proper Latin. Students still read it today, but before the words there were the battles. The first great crisis of Caesar's Gallic campaign comes almost immediately. A massive tribe of Celtic people called the Helvetii, about 370,000 of them, including women, children, and their belongings, are on the move. They are migrating out of their homeland in modern Switzerland, heading westward through Roman-controlled territory. If they pass through, they will destabilize everything. Caesar moves with breathtaking speed. He blocks their path, negotiates briefly, then, when the Helvetii try to cross a river at night, attacks. In a series of rapid engagements, he defeats them utterly and forces the survivors to return home. The Gauls, watching this performance, are stunned, but greater challenges lie ahead. Later that same year, a powerful Germanic chieftain named Ariovistus has crossed the Rhine River, the great river forming the border between Gaul and the Germanic territories, with his warriors, claiming land in eastern Gaul. Some Gallic tribes have asked Rome to help against him. Caesar seizes opportunity. Caesar marches toward Ariovistus. His own soldiers, hearing terrifying stories about the enormous size and ferocity of the Germanic warriors. Some senior officers tell Caesar the army is too frightened to fight. Caesar calls a meeting of all his officers. He gives one of the great speeches of his military career. He tells them that he is ashamed to hear that Roman soldiers are afraid. He says that if no one will follow him, he will march with just one legion, his favorite, the 10th Legion. The rest can stay behind if their courage has failed. The soldiers roar. No one wants to be left behind. Caesar marches. He meets Ariovistus. They have a brief, tense negotiation that goes nowhere. And then in a thunderous battle in the autumn of 58 BC, Caesar's legions smash through the Germanic warriors. Ariovistus flees across the Rhine, never to return. In a single year, Caesar has already transformed the military situation in Gaul. The next year, 57 BC, Caesar takes on the tribes of northern Gaul, the Belgae, who were regarded as the fiercest fighters in all of Gaul. His campaign against them is marked by one of his most impressive defensive victories. At the Battle of the Sabus River, near modern Belgium, Caesar's army is ambushed while making camp. Warriors pour from the forest without warning, hurling javelins and charging in massive numbers. What happens next reveals something extraordinary about Caesar as a commander. He sprints along the battle line, appearing at every crisis point, grabbing shields from the hands of cowards, calling soldiers by name, rallying them back into formation. His personal courage and his ability to keep a clear head in total chaos holds the line. The Romans repel the attack and eventually overwhelm their attackers. Chapter 8. Across the Channel, Britain and Beyond. In 55 BC, Julius Caesar does something that astonishes the entire Roman world. He invades Britain. Britain, the large island north of Gaul, across a stretch of water called the English Channel, was to the Romans a place of mystery and legend. They knew it existed, and they knew it was inhabited by Celtic peoples called Britanni, but few Romans had ever crossed those cold, grey waters. Britain might as well have been the edge of the world. When Caesar announced he would take legions across the Channel, people in Rome could barely believe it. Caesar is motivated partly by strategy. The British tribes were sending help to the Gallic tribes resisting Roman rule. And partly, it must be said, by the pure glory of it. Landing in Britain would be an achievement no Roman general had ever accomplished. It would make him legendary. The first British expedition, in 55 BC, is rocky. His fleet is damaged by unexpected tides. The Romans, who were used to the nearly tide-free Mediterranean, did not realize how dramatically the Atlantic tides rose and fell. The Britons fight back fiercely from the shoreline, as the Romans try to wade through the surf to land. But Caesar establishes a beachhead, wins some engagements, and returns to Gaul having technically conquered Britain, which is a stretch, but enough to send Rome into celebration. His second British expedition, in 54 BC, is larger and more successful. He takes 5 legions and 2,000 cavalry across the Channel, pushes deep into the island's interior, defeats the British king Cassivellaunus, and extracts promises of tribute. Then he returns to Gaul again. Britain would not truly become Roman for another 100 years. It would take Emperor Claudius in 43 AD to actually conquer and occupy the island properly. But Caesar's expeditions sent a shock of excitement through Rome. He had gone to the edge of the known world and come back triumphant. Meanwhile, back in Gaul, a storm was building. The Gauls had been watching for years as their lands were conquered, their warriors killed, their people enslaved. In 52 BC, a young Gallic chieftain named Vercingetorix, a name that means roughly great warrior king in the Celtic language, manages to do something no one had done before. He unites most of the Gallic tribes under his leadership and launches a coordinated rebellion against Roman rule. Vercingetorix is brilliant. He realizes that Gallic warriors cannot defeat Roman legions in open battle. The Romans are too disciplined and too well equipped, so he changes strategy. He orders his people to burn their own towns rather than let Caesar take them and use their supplies. He wages what we would today call a guerrilla war, using hit-and-run tactics, attacking supply lines, and keeping his forces mobile. Caesar is forced to chase Vercingetorix across Gaul in bitter winter conditions, struggling to feed his army as the Gauls destroy everything in their path. For a brief, frightening moment, it looks like Caesar might actually fail. But then comes the Battle of Alesia. In 52 BC, Vercingetorix retreats with his forces to a hilltop fortress called Alesia, modern Alise-Saint-Irene in France. Caesar makes an astonishing decision. Rather than attacking the heavily defended hilltop directly, he orders his army to build a wall all the way around it, a siege wall called a circumvallation, stretching nearly 11 miles in total length. The idea is to trap Vercingetorix inside and starve him out. But then Caesar gets intelligence that a massive Gallic relief army, perhaps 250,000 warriors, is on its way to break the siege. Caesar orders his army to build a second wall, this one facing outward, called a contravallation, so that his legions are essentially sandwiched between two walls with enemies on both sides. His army digs ditches, builds towers, plants sharpened stakes, creates elaborate booby traps. And then they wait. The relief army arrives. They attack the outer wall. Vercingetorix attacks the inner wall. Caesar's soldiers fight in two directions at once. The pressure is enormous. In some moments, the Roman lines nearly break. And then Caesar himself rides into the crisis, his red general's cloak visible to everyone on the battlefield, rallying his cavalry and launching a devastating charge that breaks the relief army. Seeing their rescuers flee, the remaining Gauls inside Alesia have no choice. The next morning, Vercingetorix rides out of the fortress gates alone. He is dressed in his finest armor, on his finest horse. He rides in silence to Caesar's headquarters. He dismounts. He throws his weapons at Caesar's feet. He sits down on the ground and says nothing. Caesar sends him in chains to Rome. Chapter 9. The Republic breaks, crossing the Rubicon. Back in Rome, while Caesar has been winning his impossible victories, the political situation has been deteriorating dangerously. The first triumvirate has collapsed. Crassus, the third member of the alliance, marched east with an army to win his own military glory, and was catastrophically defeated and killed at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC by the Parthian Empire, roughly modern Iran. An arrow through the eye ended the richest man in Rome. With Crassus gone, the balance between Caesar and Pompey shifts, and gradually the two great men drift from alliance into rivalry. Pompey, his military triumphs make him immensely respected in Rome, begins aligning himself with the Senate's conservative faction, Caesar's old enemies. They are terrified of Caesar. He has been in Gaul for 10 years. He has built an army of veterans who are utterly loyal to him personally, not to the Roman state. He is immensely popular with the common people. He is, in short, exactly the kind of man the old guard of Rome had always feared. In 49 BC, the Senate issues an ultimatum. Caesar must give up his army and his provinces and return to Rome as a private citizen. If he does this, his enemies plan to prosecute him for various alleged crimes committed during his consulship and governorship. Without his army, Caesar will be defenseless. Caesar knows exactly what this means. If he surrenders, he is finished. On the night of January 10th, 49 BC, or possibly the 11th, historians debate the exact date, Caesar stands on the northern bank of a small river in northern Italy called the Rubicon. This river was the legal boundary between his province and Italy proper. An ancient law, so sacred it was considered almost religious, forbade any general from crossing the Rubicon with armed soldiers. To cross it would mean war. It would mean civil war, Roman fighting Roman. Caesar stands there in the darkness, looking at the water. Later accounts, including one by the ancient writer Suetonius, say that Caesar saw a vision that night. A figure appeared on the other bank, playing a trumpet, beckoning him forward. Whether the vision was real, or a story told afterward to explain an inexplicable decision, we cannot know. What we know is what Caesar said before he crossed. The die is cast. He crossed the Rubicon with his army. There was no going back. The phrase, crossing the Rubicon, has lived in the English language ever since to describe a point of no return, a decision that cannot be undone once made. Caesar gave us that phrase over 2,000 years ago. Pompey and the Senate senators flee Rome in panic. They expected Caesar to move slowly, to be stopped by the city's defenses, to be slowed by negotiations. Instead, Caesar moves with his characteristic, terrifying speed. He races south through Italy so fast that town after town surrenders without a fight. His reputation alone, this man who had just spent 10 years conquering Gaul, is enough to make many soldiers simply switch sides and join him. Within weeks, Caesar has control of all of Italy. Pompey and the Senate flee across the sea to Greece. Chapter 10. Civil War. Caesar against Pompey. What follows is a civil war that spreads across the entire Roman world. Caesar pursues Pompey's forces relentlessly. In Spain, he defeats Pompey's allied armies. Then he crosses the sea to Greece to confront Pompey directly. At the Battle of Dyrrhachium in 48 BC, Pompey actually gets the better of Caesar, forcing his forces to retreat in disarray. It is one of the very few times in Caesar's career that he suffers a serious defeat. Pompey reportedly has a chance to destroy Caesar's entire army, but hesitates, deciding not to follow up his advantage aggressively. Caesar famously says afterward, "Today the enemy would have won if they had a commander who knew how to win." The decisive confrontation comes at the Battle of Pharsalus in Thessaly, Greece, in August 48 BC. Pompey has a larger army, perhaps 45,000 soldiers, compared to Caesar's roughly 22,000. His cavalry force is especially strong, and he plans to use it to sweep around Caesar's flanks. Caesar figures out this plan. He places a secret reserve force of infantry, on-foot soldiers, behind his cavalry on the right wing. When Pompey's cavalry charges and drives Caesar's horsemen back, they crash straight into the waiting infantry, who hold their javelins like spears instead of throwing them, aiming straight for the faces of the cavalry horses and riders. The cavalry breaks and flees in confusion. Caesar then launches a general advance across the entire line. Pompey's forces hit from multiple directions and, in disarray on the flanks, collapse. The battle is over in hours. Pompey flees, eventually sailing to Egypt. He believes Egypt's young king, Ptolemy XIII, will give him refuge. After all, Pompey had helped the Egyptian royal family in the cast. He is wrong. When Pompey's boat approaches the Egyptian shore, a small rowboat comes out to meet him. He steps in and is stabbed to death. The Egyptians have decided that helping a Roman general who just lost a civil war is more dangerous than helping Caesar. They cut off Pompey's head and have it delivered to Caesar as a gift, presumably expecting gratitude. Caesar reportedly weeps when he sees it. Whatever had grown between them at the end, Pompey had once been his partner, his friend, and the husband of his daughter Julia, who had died young. Caesar did not want his great rival dead like this. He pushes the head away. He orders Pompey given a proper burial. And then Caesar, having arrived in Egypt to chase Pompey, gets caught up in something he absolutely did not plan on. Chapter 11. Egypt and Cleopatra, the most famous meeting in history. Egypt in 48 BC is not a Roman province. It is the kingdom of the Ptolemies, a royal dynasty descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals who have ruled Egypt for over 200 years. They speak Greek, though they have adopted many Egyptian customs. The current rulers are a teenage boy named Ptolemy XIII and his older sister, Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra and her brother are engaged in a civil war of their own. She has been driven out of power by her brother's advisors and has camped with her own small army outside Alexandria, the Egyptian capital. She needs help, she needs an ally, and the most powerful man in the world has just sailed into the harbor. Cleopatra is 21 years old. She is clever, educated, and speaks 9 languages: Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Ethiopic, and several others. She is one of the only rulers in her dynasty's history who bothered to learn to speak Egyptian, the language of her own people, which made her enormously popular. Ancient writers describe her not primarily as beautiful, though she may well have been, but as irresistibly charming, with a voice like a many-stringed instrument, able to make anyone she spoke with feel like the most important person in the world. She cannot simply walk into Alexandria to meet Caesar. Her brother's guards would stop her. So she allegedly has herself smuggled into the city, rolled up inside a carpet. Some versions say it was a large linen sack, delivered directly to Caesar's quarters. Caesar, by all accounts, is immediately captivated. Cleopatra and Caesar form a political and romantic alliance. Caesar helps her regain power in Egypt, defeating Ptolemy XIII's forces in the brief but fierce Alexandrian War. Ptolemy XIII flees and drowns in the Nile. Cleopatra is restored to her throne. Caesar stays in Egypt for several months, much longer than the military situation strictly required. He and Cleopatra take a famous voyage up the Nile on a magnificent royal barge, exploring the ancient monuments of Egypt. In this period, Caesar sees the Great Pyramid of Giza, already over 2,500 years old, and reportedly finds himself genuinely awed. When Caesar finally leaves Egypt to deal with other military crises, Cleopatra is pregnant with his child. She gives birth to a son, whom she names Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra would continue for years. She eventually comes to Rome herself, staying as a guest in one of Caesar's villas, and it would cause enormous political scandal. Caesar was already married to a Roman woman named Calpurnia, his third wife. Having a foreign queen as a mistress was politically controversial. Having a son by her, especially as Caesar had no legitimate Roman sons of his own, was explosive. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Caesar still has wars to fight. Chapter 12. Victory upon victory. The final campaigns. After Egypt, Caesar's military career enters its last and most dazzling phase. In just 4 years after the Civil War begins, he fights campaigns across an astonishing range of territories. In 47 BC, he rushes north from Egypt to Pontus, a kingdom on the southern shore of the Black Sea in modern Turkey, where a king named Pharnaces II has taken advantage of Rome's civil war to seize territory and defeat a Roman force. Caesar meets him at the Battle of Zela. The battle lasts 4 hours. Afterward, Caesar sends a message to Rome reporting his victory. It is the shortest, most perfectly self-satisfied military dispatch in history. Veni, vidi, vici, Latin for I came, I saw, I conquered. 3 words, 3 perfect punchy words that have lived for over 2,000 years. It is the most famous thing Caesar ever said or wrote. And it tells you everything about the man. No lengthy explanation, no boasting, just 3 words that say, it was easy, I won, I am Caesar. He then returns to Rome briefly, deals with mutinies among his own veteran soldiers. He silences a near rebellion simply by addressing the troops as citizens rather than soldiers. The implication that he is dismissing them is so devastating that they beg to be taken back, and heads to North Africa to face the remaining forces of the Pompeian faction. At the Battle of Thapsus in 46 BC, he defeats his enemies so completely that even the die-hard conservative Cato, his most persistent political opponent, sees the end has come. Cato is in the city of Utica. Rather than surrender to Caesar or be shown mercy by a man he despises, Cato spends the evening calmly reading Plato's Phaedo, a philosophical dialogue about the immortality of the soul, then takes a sword and kills himself. Caesar reportedly says on hearing the news, "Cato, I grudge you your death, as you would have grudged me the honor of saving your life." Even at the end, it was a battle of words. One final campaign remains, the last Pompeian forces have gathered in Spain. Caesar fights his last great battle at Munda in 45 BC. It is the hardest fight of his career. At one point, Caesar reportedly has to personally push into the front lines to hold the line, later telling friends it was the first time in his life he had fought, not for honor, but for his life. He wins, but barely. Then he returns to Rome. The civil wars are over, and Julius Caesar is the undisputed master of the entire Roman world. Chapter 13. Dictator Perpetuo. The man who ruled the world. Back in Rome, the Senate, some willingly, some with grinding teeth, heaps Caesar with honors. He is given the title dictator, but not for the traditional 6-month emergency period. He is given the title Dictator Perpetuo. Dictator forever. This had never happened before. The Roman Republic had existed for over 400 years on the principle that no one person could hold ultimate power permanently. The whole system was built to prevent exactly this. 2 consuls for 1 year, regular elections, laws that limited individual power. And now there was a man with the legal title of dictator forever. But here is the complicated truth about what Caesar does with this power. He uses it, in many ways, remarkably well. He launches an enormous program of reforms, changes to how Rome is governed and how its society works. He extends Roman citizenship to people across the empire, including in Spain and Gaul, making more people feel included and represented in the Roman system. He founds new cities for veterans of his army. He creates public works projects, building programs that employ thousands of people and improve infrastructure. He orders the draining of a large marsh near Rome to create new farmland. He plans a massive new library for Rome. He reforms the Roman calendar, and this is one of his most lasting contributions. Before Caesar, the Roman calendar was a mess. It had drifted so far out of alignment with the actual seasons that the calendar said it was spring when it was actually winter. Working with an Egyptian astronomer named Sosigenes, Caesar creates a new calendar of 365 days with a leap year every 4 years to keep it aligned with the sun. This calendar, called the Julian calendar, is essentially still in use today. The modern Gregorian calendar that we use is a slight refinement of Caesar's version, made in 1582. But the basic structure, 365 days, 12 months, a leap year, is Caesar's invention. And the month of July? It is named after Julius Caesar himself. He also simplifies Roman law, making it fairer and clearer. He limits the power of the governors of provinces, who had often taxed and exploited their territories brutally. He is sometimes almost startlingly merciful to defeated enemies. Even the families of men who fought against him are often allowed to keep their property and positions. This policy is called clementia, meaning mercy or clemency. But not everyone is grateful. The Senate, watching Caesar accumulate titles and power and honors, grows increasingly uneasy. When Caesar is given the Dictator Perpetuo title, some senators see the Republic dying before their eyes. When statues of Caesar begin appearing around Rome, alongside statues of the gods, they see a king in the making. When rumors spread that Caesar plans to move the capital of the empire to Alexandria and rule beside Cleopatra as an Eastern-style monarch, panic sets in. Most dangerous of all, some believe Caesar is planning to declare himself a king. In Roman culture, there was almost no insult more inflammatory than calling someone a king. The Romans had driven out their last king, a tyrant named Tarquinius Superbus, over 400 years earlier, and the memory was still raw. Rome had defined itself for centuries as the republic that no king could ever control. The word king, in Latin, rex, was deeply, viscerally offensive to Roman ears. Whether Caesar actually intended to become a king is one of the great debates of history. He denied it publicly. There is a famous incident during a public festival when a supporter places a crown on Caesar's head, and Caesar removes it and sends it to the temple of Jupiter, saying it belongs to Rome's god, not to him. Some believe this was a sincere statement. Others believe it was a carefully staged test to see how the crowd would react. Whatever Caesar's true intentions, his enemies had made up their minds. Rome, they believed, needed saving. And they believed they were the men to save it. Chapter 14. The Conspiracy, Daggers in the Dark. The man at the center of the conspiracy against Caesar is Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus is one of the most complicated and tragic figures in this entire story. He is a senator, a philosopher, a man of deep principle. He is also one of Caesar's closest friends. Caesar has shown him extraordinary favor, protecting him during the civil war, appointing him to important positions, trusting him with high responsibilities. There is also a private, painful secret. Many in Rome believed that Brutus was actually Caesar's illegitimate son. Caesar had a long romantic relationship with Brutus's mother, Servilia, and Brutus's birth date aligned suspiciously with when Caesar and Servilia were involved. Whether this is true is impossible to prove. But Caesar reportedly called Brutus by an unusually affectionate pet name, and when he learned during the Civil War that Brutus was on the enemy side, he reportedly ordered his officers specifically to keep Brutus alive. The leader who actually organizes the conspiracy is Gaius Cassius Longinus, a sharp, cold, intensely ambitious senator who has personal grudges against Caesar. He's the one who recruits Brutus, who argues with him, and who eventually convinces him that killing Caesar is not murder, but patriotism. "The fault, dear Brutus," Cassius tells him in Shakespeare's famous play, written about 1,600 years after these events, "is not in our stars, but in ourselves." Whether Cassius said exactly those words is doubtful, but the spirit of the persuasion is accurate. He convinced Brutus that the threat to the Republic was real, and that only drastic action could save it. The conspirators, there are eventually about 60 men involved, though only 23 are assigned actual roles in the killing, begin planning in secret. They call themselves the Liberatores, the Liberators. They choose the date, the Ides of March. In the Roman calendar, the Ides referred to the 15th day of March, May, July, and October, and the 13th day of other months. The Ides of March was also the date of an important Roman festival, March 15th, 44 BC. There are warning signs everywhere, but Caesar ignores them. A soothsayer, a prophet, reportedly stops Caesar in the street weeks before and delivers the most famous warning in history: "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar laughs it off. His wife Calpurnia has a terrible nightmare on the night of March 14th, dreaming of Caesar's death. She begs him not to go to the Senate meeting the next day. Caesar is actually wavering. His health had been poor recently, and Calpurnia's distress moves him. He considers sending a message saying he is unwell and will not attend. But Decimus Brutus, another of the conspirators, a man Caesar trusts deeply, comes to Caesar's house that morning. Decimus tells Caesar that cancelling would make him look weak, that people would say his wife frightened him. Caesar cannot bear to look weak. He agrees to go. As he leaves his house, someone thrusts a scroll into his hand. The scroll contains a warning, a detailed account of the entire conspiracy. Caesar does not read it. He puts it with the other papers he is carrying, planning to read it later. He never reads it. Chapter 15. The Ides of March, the most famous day in history. March 15th, 44 BC. The Senate is meeting that day in a hall attached to the Theatre of Pompey, ironically, a building Caesar's old rival had built. Caesar takes his seat in the chair reserved for the dictator, elevated slightly above the other senators. The conspirators move into position around him. One of them, a senator named Tullius Cimber, approaches Caesar with a petition, a formal written request, asking Caesar to pardon his exiled brother. Caesar shakes his head. This is not the moment. But Cimber grabs Caesar's toga with both hands, pulling it down off his shoulder. This is the signal. The conspirators close in from all sides. The first man to strike is Casca, who drives a dagger at Caesar's neck. Caesar, startled, grabs Casca's arm. "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" he cries. Casca shouts to his brother in Greek, "Help, brother!" And then the others surge forward, and the scene becomes chaos, a frantic, desperate, terrible chaos. 23 men with daggers in a small space, all of them terrified, some of them untrained fighters who have never killed anyone. They stab each other in the confusion. Several conspirators are later found to be wounded, some by their own colleagues. Caesar tries to fight back. He uses his stylus, a metal writing instrument, as a weapon, but he is one man against dozens. The blows fall again and again. Later examination of Caesar's body by a physician named Antistius, reportedly determined that 23 wounds were found on Caesar's body, though only one was definitively lethal, a wound to the chest that pierced his heart or a major blood vessel. There is one more moment to tell. As the blows fall, Caesar pulls his toga up over his face. He does not want to be seen dying. Some ancient sources say that when he looked up through the chaos and saw Brutus raising a dagger, he said in Greek, "Kai su, teknon." You too, child. Shakespeare later translated this as et tu, Brute, and you, Brutus. And it is in this form that the line has echoed down through history, perhaps the most famous last words ever spoken. It is likely at least partially invented or embellished by later writers. But whether Caesar said it or not, the sentiment is real. The presence of Brutus among the killers was in some ways the deepest cut of all. Julius Caesar, dictator perpetuo, conqueror of Gaul, victor of 100 battles, the man who had stared down pirates and armies and tyrants for his entire life, fell to the floor at the base of the statue of his old rival, Pompey. The senators who were not conspirators fled screaming. The assassins, some of them bleeding, ran into the street, waving their daggers and shouting that they had restored the Republic, that Caesar the tyrant was dead, that Rome was free. The streets of Rome went silent. No one cheered. Chapter 16. Aftermath. The world turns upside down. The conspirators had expected to be greeted as heroes. They had expected the Roman people to surge into the streets, celebrating the death of a tyrant, praising the liberators who had saved the Republic. Instead, there was shock, confusion, and then, gradually, fury. Caesar was popular. The common people of Rome loved him. Soldiers who had fought beside him for a decade were devastated. And the conspirators had made a catastrophic strategic mistake. They had planned only how to kill Caesar, not what to do after. In the immediate aftermath, the conspirators are paralyzed. They have no plan to take over the government. They don't control the army. They don't control the treasury. They don't control anything except the daggers they've already used. Into this vacuum steps a man who will change everything. Marcus Antonius, known to history as Mark Antony. Antony is Caesar's closest lieutenant and co-consul, the other jointly elected leader. He is not a subtle man. He is physically imposing, loud, fond of wine and parties, but he is politically shrewd. He negotiates with the conspirators, agreeing to a compromise. The conspirators will not be prosecuted, but Caesar's will and his decrees will be honored, and his funeral will be public. The funeral of Julius Caesar changes everything. Antony stands before the crowd of Roman citizens, thousands of them pressed into the forum, and delivers a speech. We don't know the exact words, but the effect is documented. Antony reads out Caesar's will, which reveals that Caesar had left money to every single citizen of Rome. He describes Caesar's campaigns, his victories, his mercy to his enemies. He holds up Caesar's toga, showing the crowd the stab wounds in the cloth. The crowd goes wild. They grab whatever wood is nearby, market stalls, benches, furniture from nearby homes, and build a massive bonfire in the middle of the forum. They burn Caesar's body there, in the very heart of Rome. Weeping crowds press in from all directions. Some people fling jewelry and weapons onto the flames as offerings. Women cut off their hair as a sign of mourning. The conspirators, realizing their lives are now in danger from the angry crowd, flee Rome. The republic they tried to save is already dying. Chapter 17. The Wars After Caesar. How the Republic Ended. Caesar's assassination, rather than saving the Roman Republic, actually destroyed it. Caesar had named his great-nephew Octavian, the 18-year-old son of his sister's daughter, as his adopted son and primary heir in his will. Octavian, whose full name becomes Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, is young and seemingly unremarkable. Antony doesn't take him seriously at first. That is Antony's greatest mistake. Octavian is, if anything, more calculating and politically gifted than Julius Caesar himself. Over the next decade and a half, he outmaneuvers everyone. First, Octavian allies with Antony and another powerful general named Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate. Together they hunt down the conspirators. Brutus and Cassius, commanding armies in the eastern provinces, are defeated at the two battles of Philippi in 42 BC. Brutus kills himself rather than surrender. Cassius, hearing false news that his forces have been defeated, also kills himself. This was the noblest Roman of them all, Shakespeare later writes of Brutus, presenting him as a tragic hero who acted for the wrong reasons, but with an honest heart. Whether history truly judges Brutus that kindly is more complicated. Then the second triumvirate fractures. Antony, who has gone east and fallen deeply in love with Cleopatra, forming a romantic and political partnership with her, clashes with Octavian. The tension builds for years. Finally, in 31 BC, Octavian's fleet defeats Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, off the coast of Greece. Antony flees to Egypt. Cleopatra tries to negotiate with Octavian. Antony, in despair, attempts suicide. He is brought to Cleopatra's chamber, where he dies in her arms. When Cleopatra realizes Octavian plans to take her to Rome as a prisoner, to march her through the streets in chains as a symbol of his triumph, the way Caesar had marched Vercingetorix, she takes her own life. Tradition says she allowed a poisonous asp, a kind of Egyptian cobra, to bite her. Whether this is true, or whether she found some other method, historians debate. But Cleopatra, like Brutus, like Cassius, like Antony, is dead. Caesarion, Caesar and Cleopatra's son, who is about 17 years old, tries to flee but is captured and killed on Octavian's orders. Octavian is not going to leave a potential rival alive. Egypt becomes a Roman province. Octavian returns to Rome as the unchallenged master of the world. In 27 BC, the Senate gives him a new honorific title, Augustus, meaning the revered one. He calls himself princeps, first citizen, rather than king or dictator, learning from Caesar's mistakes. But in every practical way, Augustus Caesar is Rome's first emperor. The system of elected leaders and senatorial government that had lasted nearly 500 years is over. The Roman Empire has begun, and its first emperor took his power, riding on the name of Julius Caesar, the great uncle he never truly knew. Chapter 18. Who was Caesar really? The man behind the myth. History is full of famous people, but Julius Caesar is special. He is famous enough that nearly every person in the Western world knows his name over 2,000 years after his death. But who was he really, as a person? Let's separate the myth from the man. Caesar was, by the accounts of people who knew him, extraordinarily intelligent, one of those rare minds that seemed to work faster than other people's, that could process multiple problems at once, that found intricate solutions obvious. He reportedly could dictate letters to multiple secretaries simultaneously, working on different subjects at the same time, while doing something else entirely. He was charming in a way that seemed almost effortless. People who met him, even people who had come prepared to resist him, often found themselves won over. Cicero, the great Roman orator and philosopher who deeply distrusted Caesar politically, describes him as brilliant company, witty, engaged, intellectually stimulating. He was vain. There is no getting around this. Caesar was famously sensitive about his thinning hair. He reportedly wore his laurel crown at every opportunity, partly because it covered his bald spot. He spent considerable time on his personal grooming and appearance, and ancient writers note this with a mix of amusement and mild disapproval. Roman men were supposed to be above such concerns. He had epilepsy. Episodes occurred during stressful moments in his campaigns, and some historians believe these episodes actually frightened him more than any battlefield. He once wrote that he was terrified of having a seizure in public, of appearing weak. He was genuinely merciful, more so than was typical for commanders of his era. When cities surrendered to him, he generally treated the inhabitants well. When defeated enemies swore loyalty to him, he generally kept his word to protect them. This was notable in an era when defeated enemies were routinely enslaved or executed. He loved reading and writing. His Latin style, clear, direct, vivid, is considered a masterpiece of the language. Scholars still study it. He also wrote poetry, though most of it has been lost. He was a terrible husband and father by modern standards. He was married 3 times, to Cornelia, who died young, to Pompeia, whom he divorced after a minor scandal, and to Calpurnia. He had romantic affairs with numerous women across the Roman world, and reportedly with some men as well, which in Roman culture carried different implications than it would today, being more about social power than personal identity. He was not present for much of his children's lives, being at war for most of his adult existence. He was also, it must be said, responsible for enormous suffering. The Gallic Wars killed an estimated 1 million people and enslaved another million. Modern scholars sometimes use the word genocide, the deliberate destruction of a people, when discussing Caesar's campaigns in Gaul. He was not cruel for cruelty's sake, but he was perfectly willing to cause suffering on a massive scale when it served his strategic goals. One of the most shocking episodes in his career is his treatment of the Gallic town of Uxellodunum in 51 BC. After the town resisted, Caesar had the hands cut off all the men of fighting age who had borne arms, not killing them, but maiming them as a permanent, visible warning to other would-be resistors. He was, in short, a man of his time, and his time was not gentle. Chapter 19. Myths, Mysteries, and Legends. Over 2,000 years, Julius Caesar has accumulated myths and legends the way a ship accumulates barnacles. Some of them interesting, some of them completely false, and some of them impossible to prove either way. Let's sort through some of the most famous ones. Was Caesar born by caesarean section? This is perhaps the most persistent myth about Caesar, the idea that the caesarean section surgery, C-section, used to deliver babies when normal birth is too dangerous, is named after him because he was born that way. This is almost certainly false. In the ancient world, caesarean sections were only performed when the mother was already dead or dying, because the surgery itself was fatal. Caesar's mother, Aurelia, is well documented as being alive long after Caesar's birth. She lived until Caesar was in his 40s, so Caesar was not born that way. The name caesarean section probably comes from the Latin word caedere, meaning to cut, not from Caesar himself, though some ancient writers did speculate about a connection, which is where the myth likely started. Was he the first Caesar? No, Caesar was the family name of the Julius clan, used for generations before him. The fame of Julius Caesar simply made the name so associated with power that it became a title. After his death, his adopted heir, Octavian, used the name Caesar, and subsequent Roman emperors adopted it as well. Eventually, the word Caesar simply meant emperor in the Roman world, and later Kaiser in German and Tsar in Russian. All of these words come from Caesar's family name. Did he really say et tu, Brute? Almost certainly not in those exact Latin words. The phrase appears to have been invented or popularized by Shakespeare's play, written in 1599. The ancient sources that mention Caesar's last words say he spoke in Greek, the language he might have used with Brutus, who was himself highly educated in Greek philosophy. The phrase kai su teknon is the Greek version, but Shakespeare's Latin version has proven so dramatically perfect that it has eclipsed all other versions. Was he actually a god? After his death, the Roman Senate officially declared Julius Caesar a god, Divus Julius, the divine Julius. A temple was built in the Roman Forum, where he was cremated, and his adopted son Augustus wisely used this divine status to his own advantage, calling himself son of a god. So in the technical legal sense of Roman religion, yes, Caesar was eventually declared divine. But this was a political honor given after death, not a genuine religious belief. Did the comet really appear? Yes, in the months after Caesar's assassination, a bright comet appeared in the skies above Rome and was visible for 7 days. It appeared during games that Augustus was putting on in honor of Caesar. Already primed to see Caesar's death as a cosmic event, interpreted the comet as Caesar's soul ascending to the heavens. The comet is real. Modern astronomers have tracked it in ancient records. Its appearance at that precise political moment was extraordinary luck for Augustus, who used it brilliantly in his propaganda. Chapter 20. Little-known facts. The surprising Caesar. Here are some things about Caesar that most people don't know. Facts that make him even more fascinatingly strange and real. He may have had a sweet tooth. Roman cooking used honey as its primary sweetener, and Caesar is mentioned in ancient texts as being particularly fond of sweet dishes. At a famous dinner party, a host reportedly served an unusual dessert made of asparagus with sweet sauce, which Caesar apparently enjoyed, though his dinner companions found it terrible. He invented a kind of proto-newspaper, called the Acta Diurna, daily events. It was a daily public notice posted in the Forum, recording government decisions, military news, and events of public interest. Some historians consider it the world's first newspaper. He was an excellent swimmer. and once nearly drowned escaping from a battle. At the siege of Alexandria, when things went badly for a moment, Caesar jumped into the harbor and swam to safety, reportedly holding important papers above the water with one hand so they wouldn't get wet. He was left-handed. This is not certain. The evidence is debated, but several ancient accounts suggest this, which would have been considered unusual and even slightly suspicious in ancient Rome. He may have suffered from absence seizures, rather than the dramatic grand mal seizures most people imagine. Some medical historians believe Caesar's epilepsy presented as moments of simply blanking out or staring distantly, the same medical condition that affected other historical figures, including Alexander the Great and Napoleon Bonaparte. He wrote a grammar book. During the rapid march across the Alps, during the Civil War, while leading an army, Caesar apparently found time to write a treatise on Latin grammar called De Analogia. Writing a grammar book while conducting a military campaign during a civil war is extremely Caesar. Julius Caesar invented leap year. Well, he didn't invent the idea, but he implemented it. The Julian calendar introduced the concept of adding an extra day every 4 years to keep the calendar aligned with the solar year. Every February 29th that exists is a small consequence of Julius Caesar. He hated Gaul's weather. Caesar was apparently miserable in the cold, wet climate of northern Gaul and Britain, writing about it with barely disguised complaint in his war commentaries. Chapter 21. Caesar's Legacy. How one man shaped the world. Julius Caesar has been dead for over 2,000 years, and yet his fingerprints are all over the world you live in today. Start with the calendar. Every time you look at a calendar and see the month of July, you are seeing Caesar's name. Every time you experience a leap year, you are experiencing Caesar's reform. The entire structure of how we measure time, our 365-day year with a leap year every 4 years, is essentially his invention. Look at the names of leaders around the world. The words Kaiser, the German word for emperor, used until 1918. Tsar, or Tsar, the Russian word for emperor, used until 1917, and even the title Caesar itself, all come directly from Julius Caesar's family name. When historians call Augustus Caesar the first Roman emperor, they are pointing to the lineage. All subsequent emperors used the name Caesar as a title. The word lived for nearly 2,000 years as a synonym for ultimate power. Think about leadership and military tactics. Military academies and officers' training schools around the world have studied Julius Caesar's campaigns for centuries. His principles of speed, surprise, the importance of logistics, getting supplies to your army, keeping soldiers' morale high, and the value of flexibility over rigid plans, these are still discussed in military theory classes. Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the greatest military commanders in modern history, idolized Caesar and studied his campaigns obsessively. Think about language and literature. Caesar's Latin writings helped define the Latin language at its purest and most direct. For over 1,000 years after his death, through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, educated people across Europe read Caesar's Gallic War as a model of perfect Latin prose. His influence on the development of European literature and scholarship is incalculable. Think about government and law. The Roman Republic that Caesar transformed and that Augustus turned into an empire created legal and governmental principles that directly influenced modern Western democracy. The idea of separation of powers, dividing government into different branches, the concept of written law that applies to everyone, the notion of citizenship, all of these Roman ideas, shaped and changed by Caesar's era, eventually fed into the development of modern democratic governments, including the United States and France. The US Senate even takes its name from the Roman Senate. Think about Shakespeare. William Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, written in 1599, is one of the most performed plays in the English language. It is performed by schools, professional theatres, and amateur groups every year around the world. Lines from it, Et tu, Brute, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, have become part of the English language itself. Shakespeare didn't just tell Caesar's story. He helped shape how English-speaking people think about power, friendship, betrayal, and political violence. Caesar appears in everything from comic books to video games to movies to children's cartoons. Asterix the Gaul, the beloved French comic book series, features Julius Caesar as a recurring character, usually the butt of the joke, it must be said. Countless films have been made about him. He appears in popular games set in ancient Rome. He is perhaps the single most portrayed historical figure in Western entertainment. He was not perfect. He caused immense suffering. He effectively ended the Roman Republic that had flourished for centuries. He concentrated power in ways that set precedents for autocracy, rule by a single person, that would be repeated, sometimes catastrophically, throughout history. When historians write about authoritarian leaders who claim to rule for the people while dismantling democratic institutions, they often reach back to Caesar as an early example. And yet, he was also brilliant, bold, and in many ways genuinely progressive for his time. He expanded citizenship, reformed laws, built public works, showed mercy to his enemies, and transformed Rome from a city-state ruling a collection of territories into something approaching a true multicultural empire. The 200 years of relative peace and prosperity that followed his death, the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, was built in large part on the framework he created. He contained multitudes, as great figures often do. Chapter 22. The world he left behind, Rome's legacy and ours. When Julius Caesar was killed on the Ides of March in 44 BC, he left behind a world in chaos. But the chaos sorted itself out, after more wars, more deaths, more upheaval, into something that would shape human civilization for 2,000 years. The Roman Empire that Augustus built on Caesar's foundation lasted in the West until 476 AD, that is over 500 years after Caesar's death. The Eastern Roman Empire, based in Constantinople, modern Istanbul in Turkey, lasted even longer, all the way until 1453 AD, nearly 1,500 years after Caesar. That is one of the most extraordinary institutional legacies in human history. During those centuries, Roman civilization spread language, law, roads, cities, architecture, and culture across an enormous swath of the world. Latin, Caesar's own language, evolved into the Romance languages, Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Romanian, spoken today by over 800 million people. English, though it is technically a Germanic language, is so heavily influenced by Latin, through French, through the Church, through scholarship, that many experts estimate 60% of English vocabulary has Latin roots. The roads that Caesar's legions built, straight, engineered, and durable, formed the backbone of European transportation for 1,000 years after Rome's fall. The phrase "all roads lead to Rome" reflects a literal truth about the Roman road network, which Caesar helped expand. Some stretches of original Roman roads survive in Europe today, still perfectly paved 2,000 years later. The aqueducts that Rome built, enormous stone channels that carry fresh water from distant mountains to cities, represent an engineering achievement that would not be matched in Europe until the 1800s. Clean running water changed public health in ways that were not fully understood until much later. Roman law, the formal legal system that Rome developed and refined over centuries, partially reformed by Caesar, formed the foundation of legal systems across Europe and the Americas. The legal concept of innocent until proven guilty, the idea of having the right to face your accuser, the requirement of written laws accessible to all citizens, these trace roots back to Roman legal tradition. And none of this extraordinary legacy would have unfolded exactly as it did without Julius Caesar. Without his conquest of Gaul, Rome might not have expanded so dramatically westward. Without his crossing of the Rubicon and the civil war that followed, Rome might have remained a republic for longer, or might have collapsed into chaos sooner. Without his calendar reform, our entire system of measuring time would look different. Without his adoption of Octavian, who became Augustus, the first true Roman emperor might have been a very different person who built a very different empire. History does not follow a straight path. It bends and twists around the people who inhabit it. Julius Caesar was one of those rare individuals who bent the path of history so dramatically that even today, standing 2 millennia away from his life, we are still walking the road he helped build. Chapter 23. The last word. What does Caesar mean to us? So, we come back to where we started. A cool March morning. A man walking into a building where knives are waiting. a world balanced on a knife's edge of its own. Julius Caesar was many things: a soldier, a politician, a writer, a lover, a father, a tyrant, a reformer, a dreamer, a conqueror. He was vain and brilliant, and merciful and brutal, sometimes all in the same afternoon. He grew up in a noisy neighborhood with a proud family name and bigger dreams than his circumstances. He survived assassination attempts before the famous one, threats, prescriptions, plots, political enemies who wanted him ruined. He crossed cold seas and blazing deserts. He slept in the rain of Gaul and the sun of Egypt. He wrote his own story so well that we are still reading it. He made decisions that cost hundreds of thousands of lives, sometimes more. He made decisions that opened doors of citizenship and justice to people who had never had them before. He was human in all the magnificent and terrible ways that word implies. What should we take from his story? Perhaps this: that history is made by people, not by inevitable forces or automatic progress, but by actual human beings. People who were afraid sometimes, who made mistakes, who had bad hair days and difficult mothers-in-law and moments of self-doubt. People who chose again and again to keep going. Julius Caesar's story shows us how power works, how it attracts brilliant people, and how it can corrupt them, how the desire to do good can become the desire to dominate, how the line between a hero and a villain is often thinner than we'd like to think. It shows us how quickly a system of government can be dismantled if the people within it let their fears and ambitions override the rules they are all supposed to live by. The Roman Senate, for all its flaws, was a functioning institution. It broke not because of Caesar alone, but because of the accumulated failures, the civil wars, the proscriptions, the decades of men putting their own power ahead of the common good. And it shows us something simple and human. Even the most powerful person in the world can be stopped by 23 people who have made up their minds. Julius Caesar was born in a noisy neighborhood, survived impossible odds, conquered half the known world, reformed the calendar we still use, and died at the feet of a statue of his oldest rival. He was 55 years old. He was buried, or rather cremated, in the Roman Forum. A small temple was built where his body burned. Today, at the site of that temple in Rome, you can still visit the ruins, and people still come, 2,000 years later, to leave flowers on the spot where Caesar fell, where the greatest general of the ancient world met the most human of endings, outnumbered, surrounded, and finally alone. The die was cast, the river was crossed, the world was never the same, and neither, in all the centuries since, have we ever forgotten his name.